Hello, and here we are in the middle of the afternoon. We're going to do this for a while, aren't we? Why are we so uptight about it? Is it possible to just relax over it? Is there a such thing as relaxing, especially when there's nothing you can do? We were told in the beginning nothing could be done about the pandemic itself. But scientists were trying or attempting to come up with a reason for it so that a cure could be created by doctors. And doctors as well diligently worked and stood by waiting on that information for themselves. The important thing here is that there's one thing to experience a pandemic, and another thing to not accept it because it's something you can't escape. Now, the point here is everyone was told that was necessary to tell, I assume. Uh, Nevertheless, everyone was told a pandemic has spread. And though it originated in Asia, no other country was said to be responsible for it. However, it was described as something that no one is able to escape. Now, the fact that we're all susceptible to the pandemic is one thing. That's with any virus. That's the way the human body is made. But now it's a different thing to deal with the pandemic in the sense that anyone can contract it. To me, that says here we have the pandemic, and here we have our world. In the middle is any given thing you can think of that generally relates to us all as people from one to the other. And those things in that area are things that have been canceled out when describing or informing the world, if you will, on the pandemic. That is, that the pandemic has been classified as a universal thing. Wearing a mask is not just to prevent the spread of the virus, it's also to protect you from someone else that can contract the virus. Uh, we deal with one thing at a time. Us, me, you, either of us are capable of contracting this virus. At the same time, both of us are going to comply with the policy to wear a mask, number one, so that no one else gets it from us, and two, so that we don't get it from someone else. Now, there, I question accuracy in the studies. And the reason why is because if the pandemic is something that is airborne, that's nothing like other viruses. That's nothing like the HIV virus. That's nothing like AIDS, where we actually have to interact um, multiple times in order to cause that virus to come to the surface, or in order for that condition to evolve, if you will. And that's through having sexual intercourse. That's not the same as something that's airborne. Let's just be, if you will, hypothetical here. The HIV virus, it's been around for a long time, and it is a virus. Theoretically, there's a cure. The pandemic, COVID 19, is a virus. And work is being done to come up with a cure. Those two things are alike. What I observe, if you will, that's different is that the HIV virus is not airborne. We don't just walk around and breathe HIV. Um, the COVID 19 virus is said to be airborne. That's why these masks are worn, and that's why the policy is so um, strenuously at the front line of today's society. With in mind that it is airborne, what's to become of those that are working on the cure that's not becoming of anyone else in the world, and vice versa? My point is, wearing a mask is good to protect someone else from something you could contract, more so than wearing a mask just so you're protected from someone else about or over something that's airborne. I would like to know, respectively, how in the world we are to conquer something that's airborne as human beings, wearing a mask, particularly wearing a mask. I've worn a mask for different reasons. I don't mind a mask, but speaking on this pandemic, I pose more of a competitive opinion than normally. And this is just for entertainment purposes only. This is just a discussion. However, may it be, if we're working with an airborne virus, I'd like to know what exactly we're doing in order to attack the virus. How is it exactly that we're getting around being susceptible or being potentially at risk evenly across the board for contracting the virus, as well as becoming exposed to the virus? You see, there's two different aspects that have been mentioned. One is giving it to someone. Two is getting it from someone. And in the middle, the variable is that it's airborne. It's not like HIV virus. It's not like AIDS. You don't get it because of circumstantial reasons, something that specifically you do to incur this kind of a condition. This is said to be airborne. You can be completely healthy and have this virus and spread it to someone else, is my understanding. As well, you can be healthy and live a completely good lifestyle, and you can end up with it. Here we're in a dilemma. We're not, with the airborne virus, able to look at each other and say, based on a male and a female, or a husband and wife, a couple, an obvious family that's together, say, hey, you stand a chance of the COVID-19 virus. As we could look and say, those two are together, and if they don't use protection, they stand a chance to contract the HIV virus from one to the other. We can use a circumstance with that level of a situation. But now with something that's airborne, we don't have a way to look and say, as we would, I'm not particularly a demographer. I don't judge a book by its cover, if you will. But, so to speak, even if that were the case, there is, in this case, no accuracy in that. There is no way to look at each other. Just in traffic, on your job, at the park, in public, or at home, and say, based on what you see, if you were going to demograph someone, you're, someone that can catch the virus, or you have the virus and I can catch it from you. We can't do that with something that's airborne. We can do that with something that's not airborne. It's something like HIV, where we know if you're consistent in a particular pattern, over time you could potentially spread some type of a disease, because that's a geological fact. Probably has been a theory before, and has eventually sustained enough of our imagination, if you will, to be fairly more believable than not. Okay, without making sure that everyone across the board is exactly who this is directed to. Indirectly, the pandemic, it's not like that. If it's truly airborne. If it's not airborne, we have no discussion. But particularly because it's airborne, in my understanding, and no one has a way to pinpoint where it's come from outside of a generalization. What country? That's a large range of motion. A country is humongous. And socioeconomically, each little town, city inside of that country is humongous as well. So let's look at this. The airborne aspect. Let's look at it in that perspective. It's airborne. Where do we start with realistically protecting ourselves? Where exactly do we get off, or where exactly do we get on? Something that we too, according to what's been said, are just as equal in responsibility for tending to this pandemic. It's not something that can just be left in the hands of any particular person. It's something, according to the report, that everyone has to contribute an equal effort in order to just survive it. That's not yet guaranteed a cure. That's not said this is the way out of the pandemic. We don't know a way out of the pandemic currently. And things don't look so promising yet about getting out of it. The way the human body works, when it's getting to the point where an illness or a virus has reached its peak and the symptoms are starting to come forth and we're experiencing that condition. Before that point, the human body has taken in that matter and worked around that matter so that when the healing time does come, we can heal. Now the body needs whatever is for it to go through, for better or for worse, on the inside in order to do one or the other, to get over it or to succumb to it. It works in our immune system. Now, that means this virus, it starts, especially if it's airborne, it starts from within the body, from the inside, rather. When it starts from the inside and it comes out, it's not coming out in the form that it is in inside the body. That's a different form after the body's worked with it and the body's gotten rid of, like everything else, the portion of whatever it is that the body doesn't need. Okay, now that comes back around to the body, if that may be the case, and the body does the same thing again. This is what the body does with everything. Okay, we are regenerating creatures, a species that regenerates. We're successful in reproduction. Cases come about where that's an issue, but nothing changes that pattern and nothing changes that mold that we're in. Even those that are monogamous, those that are celibate, people that practice abstinence, it's not that they don't accept reproduction, the art of human biologic reproduction. It's just that they have more particular reasons on why they would not want to put themselves specifically in a particular matter. Here, that's a strength in will and in logic, because that's everyone's take on the pandemic compared to anything else. In this current time, we're thinking more on what is it that I did to cause the pandemic. No one's exempt from a mask. Everyone's got to wear a mask. This is seen everywhere. And everyone's thinking, whether it's single or whether you're someone's significant other, everyone with social distancing and the other repercussions to this pandemic has inspired each person to question him or herself, to reevaluate him or herself, if you will, to the question, what is it that I've done that no one else could have possibly done to contribute to the pandemic? It's airborne, and there's no cure right now. No one's come as well and said, you, come now. We have to treat you, we have to test you, because everyone's possible outcome of this is even, it's equal. So that's why we want everyone wearing these masks. That's why we want everyone complying with this policy. And not to do that is going to be an issue across the board. It's not debatable. It's something we want, and it's something we're reinforcing. We're implying this is the way to deal with this pandemic. I question if it's effective. I think it's creative, and I really think it's artistic, it's articulate, it's professional, and technically, it always does make sense. And so I'm not one that's just jumping to wearing a mask and now I've got these things to say about how great this is and what the pros are this and what the cons are that. Comfortably in a mask, because I physically train and I could use the respiratory exercise personally, I think I'm in a good position to question how effective this is across the board. Now, that's what the point is, and that's the catch 22. This is not a question about the policy. This is a question about society. How is society going to survive, trying to survive the pandemic? If you can understand that, how, not why. And I'd like an answer as well. We're going to deal with this. You can deal with an airborne pandemic, but you also need to be able to deal with what you're doing to contribute to the pandemic. This is reality. You've got to come up with this. You have got to come up with what it is that you're doing in this lifetime and today. You've got to come up with what it is that you are doing. Because as much as everyone's waiting on a cure, everyone's waiting on the miraculous thing to happen where someone is going to begin the breakthrough. Someone's going to start the whole recovery process off. If it's airborne and it's equivalent across the planet Earth, then someone's going to be responsible for generating the curable gene. Someone's going to be the one that is immune to it, in fact. That also means that person's free to breathe. Self-conscientiously, that person does not have to work on something that's a natural thing humans do. Having sexual intercourse, or sharing saliva, body liquids, bodily fluids, that's not the same as breathing. There's no way to pinpoint what good breathing is, what bad breathing is, what right breathing is, or what wrong breathing is. What we do is breathe on a normal basis as well as in a natural and normal way. Okay? This is not about who breathes fast and who breathes slow and what the difference in between them is. This isn't for competition. And I'm glad of that. What this is about is being able and being capable. With those two ironic aspects in mind, combined with that, the factor of the pandemic, airborne. No one's safe and no one's harmed, in danger, without everyone else. This is the equation. I breathe, I'm alive as a human, you're alive as a human, you breathe. The pandemic is the variable, which is airborne, is generating through each of us. We wear a mask since we were supposed to, and we social distance. Solve this. We're still capable of, one, contracting it to someone, and two, having it contracted to us, ourself. Now, since that's the case, how is it that we get around dealing with the pandemic? Are we even right now dealing with the pandemic is the question. Since the pandemic and since the attempts to resolve it, have we or have we not developed a whole new issue that we still have yet to pay attention to and examine, because we're still working with the pandemic? Now, if the pandemic is going to come and go, I think that's awesome. But if the pandemic is going to come and say hello instead of bye bye, where does that leave us with what we're doing right now, wearing the mask, and other things are going to come about as time goes on. Um, you know, in this attempt to confront, frankly, this condition, because according to first responding reports, this thing has surfaced. It's not per se emerged or evolved. It's come to a surface. And so supporting that is, other pieces of information like it's airborne. Anyone can contract it. Anyone's carrying it. No one's exempt. That leads me really strongly towards accuracy and real skill, expertise. I question if it's really uh, accurate. I think the pandemic's realistic, but so is breathing. So is everything else in this world. All things are realistic. Ironically, that's where our imagination comes from, in a more articulate or artistic way of putting things here. I think since all things are realistic, two is the reality possibly that we are just up for a different era altogether. All through history, people that are no longer living, you know, lived once upon a time and experienced complete change. Um, the way we enjoy our individual rights happen in the same traditional theme type of way. How we have some religions that are for uh, abstinence and others are for even multiple spouses, not just one. Um, the differences that make this world the diverse and articulate world that it is, uh, I think that's worth the time and effort that has been put into it thus far. Now, I don't think that when we get into a planetary aspect, that we're as savvy in that kind of a perspective as we are dealing with the world and how interactively we just so happen to manner ourselves, if you will, or behave, so to speak. We're getting ready to put all of those practices um, to a rest, and the more prominent and profound way of stating what our current exercise is can be seen. I think it's fair to respect each and every person because of this, rather than to make a point to be respectful during this. Based on the report, there is no way to get around this. Say there's a cure. What's the point in a cure with something that anyone can get around to someone else, and vice versa? Anyone can get it from any random person. Where are we pinpointing our intelligence? And as if this was a trip into space, where is our point from which we travel? And simultaneously, where is our point of destination dealing with this pandemic? I'd like to know how accurate this information is from one person. I don't want to know several, a stack of statements or articles worth of information. Just what's equivalent. to the current equation that we're facing. Why do we get out of this? Instead of how do we get out of this, I like to know why it is that we get out of this. And the reason, ironically, I like to know why we get out of this instead of how we get out of this is because, according to the description of the pandemic, it's airborne. That means generally there is no real way, besides depending on the body's health, to get out, in or out of it. In or out. It's no pinpoint to say it came from Joshua, it came from Sarah, it came from Jacob, it came from Timothy, it came from Jessica. There is no culprit, if you will, here. Even from the beginning of the report, no one's named a specific person. It's struck and it's been studied, and we've come up with what it's called. Now, we've also come up with if it's curable or not. But all along those lines, we've learned generally how it's structured. And that's helpful. But if the whole story is that there is no way to pinpoint this condition, and it is in fact fatal, where does the information come from? Is the person that reports immune? Is that person not in the same category as everyone else? Possible for, the virus. The scientists researching it, are they exempt from suspicion, if you will, to either get the virus from someone else or give the virus to someone else? The doctors, are they supposed to influence something no one else can influence or possibly be inspired by because they're working on it? Is that the answer to what we want to know about the pandemic? Catch-22 here is not that we're trying to get to the pandemic. What we're trying to do here is, in Sound City, understand what exactly we're looking at. And if we can't get exactly what we're looking at, we would rather not discuss it. We've gotten beyond sharing statistics and comparing, while as well very aware that within each other's 6 feet, we're still in air and we could get it, even if we're cool with getting by each other in terms of contracting it with that event, with that moment. We still have to worry about the other half of the pandemic, that's getting the pandemic from someone else. We can stand in a completely sterilized, disinfected area and distance ourselves like common human beings and courteous individuals professionally, and we could still not be free of the thought of the pandemic because it's airborne. In that just concept, where is there room for anything else? And if there is room, what is it that room must serve? What is the missing factor here? And it's good that we're able to get out to some of the other networks and actually work with our analysis a little more in detail, a little more proportionate to what we came up with when we evaluated this study subject from the beginning. We can do two things, but the catch 22 is we can only do one of those things at a time. So what we'd like to know is, before we're bombarded with anything else that's not going anywhere, when we take it out and we share with our community our idea, and we would like to know as well the opinions of others. Where are we right now regarding each other's space as we do what we've been doing for over 100 years just to survive? I'm not talking about really, anything else, because this thing gets really touchy since it involves everyone. It affects everyone that we're used to. All kinds of things are going to affect everyone. That's how socioeconomics works. Now, with respect to each person, I'm confident and comfortable just wanting to know what we're dealing with while we are working across the nation. In fact, to get this thing under control. I think when people aren't wearing a mask, I don't think that's it to be non-compliant with the policy. I think that's to survive, to personally make sure you're okay. When someone's running out of air, I mean, we're sitting here in a dilemma in this equation, and we're at Olympics. A person has to really be really fit during these kinds of surprises. Not being in good health, being in poor health, it comes as a bite, if you will, when something like this happens. Nevertheless, that person still has his or her individual right. We're not being, the company or store's manager, or we're not being the team's coach, we're not being the class's instructor, is a part of that person's life. That person, when that person is not in front of the class and is at home, when that person is not coaching the team on a game day or during practice, and it's a day off. For those that are used, if you will, as role models, there needs to be a different implication implemented to support those community citizens. This thing cannot be so technical and so professional that we're overlooking who our heroes are on a daily basis. In an equation, I feel comfortable working on solving the equation when I know something like that. We have on one hand those that diligently work to solve this, and we have on the other hand those that already know what the solution is. We've got to bring those two things into the middle area where the real situation is. The item we want to discuss, there is a physical proof of the pandemic, as with any virus or a bacteria, and that's the simple about it. That's the plain about it. What we need right now is whoever doesn't mind discussing the pandemic to come forth, instead of whoever's willing to discuss how to or how not to deal with the pandemic simultaneously. One person for one race. See you later.